What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And we are coming to you after the Cavs' last road game of the regular season, where they came away with a 108-102 victory in Madison Square Garden against the New York Knicks. Chris, this is a game that had very little meaning for both sides, as there was a lot of implications around the league that could have affected the standings either way. Obviously, the Cleveland Cavaliers did not really care about what was going on around the league. They're the number one seed in the Eastern Conference, but they had a different kind of mindset than a team that wasn't really caring about a game in the 81st game of the season. They came back from 23 points down. Chris, you're in New York. You got to talk to the players. You got to see this game in person. Tell me about the vibes in Madison Square Garden in that fourth quarter and how things shifted as the game became close to in favor of the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Well, I think we have to do a little backstory here. When Kenny Atkinson was a member of the Atlanta Hawks staff, the year that Atlanta was the number one team in the Eastern Conference, they locked up the number one seed pretty early. And Kenny said that during his time in Atlanta, all the coaches got together, everybody from the organization got together, the players got together, and they all decided that it was best for them to rest and get fully healthy going into the playoffs. They talked about the whole rest versus rhythm thing, and they determined that rest was more important. And Kenny talked about that a little bit tonight going into the game against New York, and he mentioned it again after the game against the Knicks, that he feels like that played a role in Atlanta not being the team that it was during the regular season. They were such a rhythm team. They were such a free-flowing, rhythmic offense, and they were a team that they feel like lost their edge by sitting for 7, 8, 9 days, whatever it was, during his time in Atlanta. And he said that was something that played into his mind when he was deciding what to do here with the Cavs. And I think you saw tonight the rewards of Kenny making the decision that he made. The Cavs played with an edge. They played with pride. It was an opportunity for some of these guys to get their confidence back. Now, all of a sudden, Darius Garland goes into the playoffs, Ethan, and he's riding high off of this game against New York, off of what he did the other night against Chicago. And Darius was in a post-All-Star dip. We've talked about the numbers. Since the All-Star break, Darius is shooting 40% from the field. He's shooting 34% from three-point range, and he's averaging about 18 points on 16 shot attempts. The level of efficiency, the level of productivity from Darius just hasn't been there for a majority of the second half of the season. And Darius talked about that with myself and Joe Vardon of The Athletic in the locker room after the game. And his message to Cavs Nation was essentially, relax. I still believe. I still have confidence in myself. My teammates have confidence in me. The coaching staff has confidence in me. And late in the fourth quarter, when the Cavs were trying to mount their rally against New York, coming back from 23 down, Darius got challenged by 4 of his teammates. Go win the game for us. Go finish this comeback for us. And Darius's fingerprints, like they have been for a majority of the season, were all over the Cavs' execution in clutch time. He was great. Made every shot he took. Blew past Mikal Bridges. They sent 2 guys on him. He found Max Strus for open threes. They sent 2 guys on him. He found Evan Mobley, Jared Allen. He made the right plays over and over and over again in late game situations. And I think, not that there's anything to this momentum, not that there's anything to, what happened tonight against New York is going to be predictive of what Darius is going to show up in the first round against whoever the Cavs play against. But you could just sense a little swagger back from Darius. You could sense, the Cavs playing with a purpose after they were challenged by Kenny Atkinson. And I think those things were what Kenny was looking for and hoping for when he made the decision that he made to play some, not all, but some of his regulars tonight against New York.
Chris, in that fourth quarter, we're talking about Darius Garland and Clutch Player of the Year and his candidacy for all of these things. And I'm looking at Darius going on this flurry, and I looked to my fiance and I'm like, how many points has he scored in a row? Like,
Yeah,
how
11.
many of these, like, yes, 11 points in a row was the answer. And I'm like, wow, this guy is literally taking over this game. And I wrote about this for my preview article for tonight's game between the Cavs and the Knicks. And I was like, it's going to be an opportunity for Darius Garland to test himself against one of the better physical defenses in the NBA, especially when you talk about him having the opportunity to also guard Jalen Brunson, who was healthy enough to play in tonight's matchup. I just think it was a good kind of ready up kind of situation for Darius, as you mentioned, and him continuing to get back into a flow after a rough March stretch. But we all had this kind of overlooking, me, you, and Jimmy. I don't want to say all, because there were a lot of doubters that look back to Darius Garland and were like, this kind of looks a little scary. This looks different. I mean, obviously, it was a little bit alarming to the similarities of last season to this season in March, even though he wasn't dealing with the injuries, wasn't dealing with the personal stuff behind the scenes. But what I continue to tell you and what I continue to tell Jimmy is he was having fun. He was smiling. He still had the joy. He was still Darius Garland, even if the productivity wasn't showing that. And over the last two games, we got to see Darius Garland play to his full force. And the New York Knicks game was the perfect kind of measuring stick that the Cavs needed to figure out where they were heading into the playoffs. And I do not want to discredit, as well as Darius Garland going 6 of 6 from the field in that fourth quarter and having a great showing, Max Strus hit some huge shots. He was 3 of 4 from the field, 3 of 4 from deep. All of those 9 points obviously coming from the 3-point line, right? He's a guy who we know has had celebrations where it looks like he's, to reference back to Pedro Serrano from Major League, when he's running down the first baseline. I'm not going to describe or show you, but if you know, you know. And this guy is somebody that I feel like continues to show himself in a great light in Max Strus, and continues to show himself that he is ready for the playoffs and all these things. The fourth quarter was the big teller for me, Chris. They outscored the New York Knicks 30-16. It was the first time that they had scored 30 points in the game. And it was just a big telltale sign of they're ready to go. And I want to get into, since you were there, what Kenny Atkinson conversation was like with the guys that kind of flipped the switch. Because we talked about this. There's an opportunity for Kenny Atkinson to go to the bench players, to go to the two-way guys, to go to these guys, but he didn't. He stuck with the main guys, the main rotation players, and it paid dividends, because they could have gone and said, we don't really want this game. We don't really need this game. But instead, they went out in pursuit to win it.
Yeah, it just goes back to Kenny continues to push all of the right buttons for this team, and he just has a pulse of this team and how to get through to these guys. So, they're down 23. It's early in the second quarter. I don't want to say it was a playoff environment, because it wasn't, but it was Friday night at MSG. What's better than that? So it was a raucous crowd. Going into the night, New York didn't know what its fate was going to be in terms of where they were going to be seated. Part of that was going to tie into what happened with Indiana, the B team or the C team of the Pacers against the C team of the Orlando Magic. So this was a game that had some stakes for New York, and Josh Hart was questionable, and Jalen Brunson was questionable, and OG Anunoby was questionable, and it was almost the full strength Knicks. They didn't have Cat. Cat's a big deal. Cat's a difference maker for them at both ends of the floor. But this one had stakes, and the fans felt it. It was also fan appreciation night. So there was a buzz in the building. And so the Cavs are down 23. It's the second quarter. Fans are going nuts. The Knicks are making like every shot that they were taking, including a bunch of threes. And Kenny Atkinson just turned to the guys in one of the timeouts and he said, look, if we don't want to be here, we'll play the young guys. And he said, I want you guys to tell me, do you want to play? And then he walked away. And he gave them an opportunity to contemplate that, to think about their answer. He came back and they all said they wanted to play. And they went out there and they played like a team that wanted to play. They played like the team that has run through the Eastern Conference for a majority of the season. I don't want to say flip the switch, but they found their competitive edge. They raised the intensity. They played harder on the defensive end of the floor. They played more like the Cavs. It was more like Cavs basketball. And they responded to the challenge that Kenny Atkinson issued. And yeah, there were points throughout the course of the game where Kenny had to sprinkle in Craig Porter Jr. and Jalen Tyson because the Cavs were missing 4 of their regulars in the rotation. They probably asked more of guys like Isaac Okoro and Dean Wade than maybe they were planning on at various points in the final couple of games. But they answered the challenge from Kenny. And in the words of Max Strus, who was interviewing with FanDuel Sports Network and Serena Winters, he was proud of the fight. He was proud of the effort. In the words of Jared Allen, when they were down 23, he said, holy molasses. Literally said holy molasses, at least he says. He said holy molasses because it's the most Jared Allen thing ever. And he said, we had to decide what's going to go on here. Are we going to let them beat us by 30? Are we going to let them blow us out? Or are we going to come back and actually play basketball, Cavs basketball? And they decided to be the Cavs, and they decided to put forth the effort that was required to complete the comeback with a brilliant fourth quarter. They can't get into the habit of doing those kinds of things, but it just shows that when Kenny sends a message, when Kenny issues a challenge, these guys respond to it. The water bottle toss from about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, it's what the team needed to kind of raise their antenna, and they went out and they responded to it. A challenge that Kenny issued to Jared Allen personally against Ivica Zubac in the second matchup against the Los Angeles Clippers, because in the words of Kenny Atkinson, Jarrett was thrown into the third row repeatedly by Zoo. Jarrett goes out, he answers that challenge, he has a great game, and Zubac doesn't go for 20 and 20. It's one of the rare times that he hasn't gone for 20 and 20, it seems like, over the last month of the season, where he's just been a beast for the Clippers. But like, those are moments that tell you that Kenny understands how to communicate with these guys. And these are moments that tell you that these guys have bought into Kenny and they believe in Kenny to a different level. Now it's a question of, do they believe in the entirety of this group that they can do something special? And it seems like the answer to that question is yes. Everybody in that locker room believes that they have something special, and they're going to do everything that they can to maximize it.
Chris, tonight was tied for the Cavs' largest come-from-behind victory in New York.
Mm-hmm.
So, Madison Square Garden. Since 1997-1998. Cleveland also overcame a 23-point deficit at MSG on November 13th, 2017. That was also the Cavs' last comeback of 23 or more points in a win against any NBA team. We also know that tonight's victory, the Cavs have now reached 30 road wins in a single season for the first time in franchise history. Prior to this season, the previous best mark for road wins in a single season was 27 in 2008-2009. Not to mention, the Cavs now have won 16 more games than last season, which is tied for the second largest win improvement ever for an NBA team that won 48 or more games the previous year. The other two teams are the Los Angeles Lakers, who went from 48 wins to 69 wins in 1971-1972, and then the Golden State Warriors, who were plus 16, 51 to 67 in 2014-2015. So I think it has been repeatedly said, and I cannot get tired of saying this enough. It has been a historic season for the Cleveland Cavaliers. It's been a season that a lot of people can look back on. And even though it's just the regular season, even though Donovan Mitchell would want us to say they have not done anything yet, it has proven that this team has taken itself to the upper echelons, not of the Eastern Conference, but of the NBA. And even though this game didn't mean anything, I think it proved just how this Cavs team is ready for the playoffs and how this Cavs team doesn't really have a whole lot to worry about, especially for the fans, especially for the critics who were like, ooh, March month.
Hmm.
Ooh, we don't know if this Cavs team is going to be able to play to the caliber that they had all season. Well, without Donovan Mitchell, without Sam Merrill, without Ty Jerome, without DeAndre Hunter, they almost beat an entire fully forced unit of the New York Knicks. Although they did not have Karl Anthony Towns, and he's a big piece of that. They did have Mitchell Robinson back, which is something different from they haven't faced this season. And I think that was a good mark of challenge for Jared Allen, and he showcased himself in a great way tonight as well.
I think the other thing too, Ethan, and I think this is important. Um, I think there's a different feeling around this team going into the playoffs. Playoffs aren't here yet. They have to finish Sunday. The Cavs are still deciding how they're going to handle fan appreciation night, who's going to play, who's not going to play. I think the answers are obvious to that question, but there are still some conversations that Kenny wants to have with his staff, with the medical team, and with some of the players. I've been told by multiple sources that Donovan is done for the regular season, that Ty Jerome is done for the regular season, and Darius Garland's probably done for the regular season too. But each individual player, like as Kenny Atkinson said, this is a players' league. This is a player-driven decision. What do the players think is going to be best for them? What do the players think they need? Do they feel like they need to play another game and get some rhythm and take a few shots in a meaningful situation? Or do they need to sit? So there still is one more game, but for all intents and purposes, they're headed to the playoffs. And they're in a state physically and mentally that they just weren't last year. And you feel that. You feel that with these guys. There is a different level of belief in Kenny Atkinson, the coach, and Kenny Atkinson, the tactician, than there was in JB Bickerstaff. There just is. There's a different feeling of freshness because of the way that the Cavs handled things in the regular season, the managing of minutes, the rest nights, the injury situations. None of them are lingering right now. Like, yes, you have the Donovan Mitchell ankle thing, but if tonight was a meaningful game in game 81, he would have played. They don't have, if you remember last year, Dean Wade, there was no clarity on whether he was going to be able to play. Karis LeVert was dealing with an achy knee. So there were just like a lot of things hanging over this team going into last year's playoffs, including, Donovan Mitchell. How can I choose my words carefully so that I don't get yelled at about this again? Donovan Mitchell angrily talking about the state of the team following a blowout loss against the Denver Nuggets, where he said point blank on the record, quote unquote, it's effing April. Like, he knew that the team just wasn't playing to the level that it needed to. He knew that there wasn't a consistency attached to the team. He didn't feel like the team showed what it could be, what it was trying to become. And because the Cavs accomplished so much during the regular season, like you were talking about the 64 wins, part of who they've become, part of this belief that they have in themselves is what they've been able to do throughout this 82 game grind. They saw the highest of the highs. They saw a level that they could get to consistently where they were just one of the most dominant teams in the NBA, where they had a prolific offense that was one of the best in NBA history, where they were one of a few teams with a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense. That's who they are. They showed that level. So there's a belief that they are that team. And Kenny Atkinson said before the game tonight, and he reiterated it after the game, I like where we're at going into the playoffs. And it doesn't mean that everything was perfect during the regular season. It doesn't mean that everything was perfect in March. And they certainly showed some flaws. And we've discussed those many times on this podcast. But the belief level with this group and the feeling around this group going into the playoffs is just different. It is. And I think that's going to go a long way. And I think, not that, tonight enhanced that or anything along those lines, but they left feeling really, really good about where they were heading into the playoffs.
What you're saying has been encapsulated by Donovan Mitchell multitude of times, right? And when I was in Detroit for their last matchup on the road against them a couple of weeks ago on the 28th of March, I believe it was, I mean, Donovan literally said, and I'm going to quote him, I think habits are a big thing. But I think when you look at what we did last year was way worse. Like and this is me not quoting him anymore. This is completely different from last year. This is an entirely different mindset. This is an entirely different headspace and a confidence level and all these things. And in part, it's because of what Kenny Atkinson has empowered in these players, but it's also just the results of those, right? Obviously, you talk about the 64 wins, but there are so many players individually that are having career years this season. We're talking about guys that have gone from off the entire radar to, okay, how much do we have to put this guy into our game plan for the playoffs? Yes, I'm looking at you, Ty Jerome. Sam Merrill, that was kind of you last year. Okay, we know that you can shoot. Okay, we didn't know you could shoot like this. This year, it's more like, okay, we knew you can shoot. Hold on, you could hold up defensively too? You have help defensively too? You got DeAndre Hunter backing you up. You got Evan Mobley backing you up. You got Donovan Mitchell on the other side of the zone. Like, I think when you talk about this team, and I think you said it really well on yesterday's podcast, there are no weaknesses, right? It is very hard to point out. Obviously, there are things that teams can exploit, and we saw that in the weaknesses of March, where teams are going to try and punish them in those areas when it comes to rebounding, when it comes to turnovers, and all those things. But if the Cavs play to this level, if the Cavs play to this standard, if they continuously push themselves to be at their best for 48 minutes, I don't think there is a lapse that you're going to see like we saw in March. This isn't a team that isn't really worried about those situations. In the playoffs, there's going to be a different level of lock-in, and I think you can tell that by this team not only doing that in the fourth quarter tonight, but by Kenny Atkinson, as Chris mentioned, being able to tap into different areas and say, not just game by game, but middle of the game, hey, y'all are not being serious enough. Y'all are not playing to the standard that we have set from the beginning of the season. Lock in, tap in, whatever you got to do. Tell me, like, that might be my favorite quote of the year, Chris. Reading your game story from tonight. Tell me if I got to take you out. Tell me if y'all want to play. Like, that is the type of coaching, like, as a former player, you love that. Right, you love to hear a coach push you to the next level, especially a coach that you respect. You're like, oh, you don't think I'm doing as hard as I can go? You don't think I'm playing as well as I can? All right, let me see if I can crank it up a bit. Jared Allen has been a great example of that all year long, right? Whenever Kenny Atkinson speaks, Jared Allen listens. So I think it's an important portion to note how Kenny Atkinson has influenced these players, but also just the retroactive feature of that and how Kenny Atkinson has instilled in them that what he's saying matters. And it's not just him, it's Johnny Bryant yelling at Donovan Mitchell, it's the other assistant coaches who are in player development and how they can poke. And sometimes it's good to poke the bear, especially when you're on the same team, right? But before we get into anything else, I do want to list off the Eastern Conference postseason picture because it has been set as of tonight. And obviously, we know that the Cleveland Cavaliers are at the top of this. Number 2, the Boston Celtics. Number 3, the New York Knicks. Number 4, the Indiana Pacers. Number 5, the Milwaukee Bucks. Number 6, the Detroit Pistons. Number 7, the Orlando Magic. Number 8, the Atlanta Hawks. Number 9, the Chicago Bulls. And number 10, the Miami Heat. Chris, I don't know about you, but I'm excited for all of these matches. The potential matchups for the first round for the Cavs and the Celtics, you obviously understand where these teams can fare off, but then you look at the second round matchups. Do the Knicks play the Celtics in the second round, right? Do the Cavs play the Bucks or the Pacers? And we talked about in length, especially you mentioning how you have seen what Indiana has done at the forefront and how they can be competitive. When you just talk about the overarching perspective of the playoffs, and especially in the Eastern Conference, I think this could be as exciting as they've been in a very long time.
Well, I think one of the things that becomes interesting is which teams on the periphery are ready. You know what I mean? Like, is Detroit ready? Is Detroit ready to pull off an upset against the Knicks? Because the Knicks look pretty broken. They don't look like they like each other very much. It doesn't look like a bunch of guys that understand and are accepting of their roles. They're very much the anti-Cavs. And I think this is where Donovan deserves a ton of credit. You know, for a superstar, for somebody who has accomplished as much as Donovan has, for somebody who is at least in the conversation for MVP this year, one of the top 5 spots in MVP this year. For him to willingly take a step back and sacrifice for the betterment of the team and have enough maturity to say, you know what my next step is? My next step is not me doing more. My next step is me doing less. My next step is minutes down, shot attempts down, points per game down, usage rate down. And for him to say, Darius, be more of a late game guy. Evan Mobley, be more involved in the offensive end of the floor. Like, that takes a special kind of person. That takes a special kind of player. That takes a special kind of leader. And when you watch the Knicks, like, you just look at guys that seem to be thinking to themselves, I should be doing more. I want to do more. And maybe not for the betterment of the team, but because I believe I can do more, and I believe that I should have the opportunity to do more. And it's just, it really crystallized to me the importance of Donovan to this organization and him empowering his teammates, and how not everybody in his situation, not everybody who has accomplished the things that he has accomplished throughout the course of his career would do that. But role delineation is very, very important when you get into a playoff environment. And I think when you look at the Cavs roster, up and down, all these guys have an idea of what their role is going to be. Not necessarily how many minutes they're going to play, not necessarily how many shots they're going to take, but what is their role? What is this coaching staff asking of them when their number is called? And can they thrive in that role? Can they be effective in that role? And is it best for the team for them to be in that role? And you have that level of acceptance throughout the course of this roster. Like Ty Jerome, he probably has a reason to feel like, hey, I could probably go somewhere and be a starting point guard. I probably could. But this is a really good situation for me. They're giving me a freedom. They're giving me a power. So I'm just going to accept whatever it is that they want from me, whatever they think is best for me, and whatever they think is best for the team. And I'm just going to, when my number is called, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to make an impact. I'm going to make a difference somehow, some way. And Darius kind of got into this when he was having a conversation with us in the locker room about his numbers were down, and he knew that his numbers were down, and he knew that Cavs Nation was kind of panicking. But he was still trying to make an impact, and he still felt like he was making an impact, even though his shooting efficiency just wasn't there. He was creating shots for his teammate. He was trying to defend. He was trying to hold up on switches and fight through screens and stuff like that. And those things are important, like finding other ways to be effective, even when things aren't going as well as you think, or at least you want them to, and they aren't going to the standard that you have set for yourself. And like all of that stuff you see from the Cavs. And I don't know that you see the same from Milwaukee, right? Like, I don't know that you see the same from the Knicks. So I think it's going to be really, really fascinating to see which teams are ready for everything that the playoffs entail. And some of that is sacrifice. And some of that is just saying, you know what? Like, yeah, maybe I could go out there and score 30. Yeah, maybe I could go out there and take 15 to 18 shots. But they need me to defend. So you know what? I'm going to do that. I'm going to put my focus there. I'm going to put my attention there. I'm going to put my energy there. And I don't know that every team in the Eastern Conference is ready to do that. You know, you see that with Boston, you see it with Cleveland, you see it to some degree with Indiana as well. And I just think it's going to be fascinating from that standpoint. The other thing that I think is fascinating, Ethan, is that for a team like Milwaukee that has spent so much on its roster and has made so many win now moves, what happens if they don't win now? What happens if they're one and done? What happens if the Knicks are one and done? Tom Thibodeau is probably gone, but are there other trickle down effects of those kinds of things? You know, because I think you can admit that Detroit's ahead of schedule, right? Maybe Chicago. I don't know what Chicago is, to be perfectly honest with you. But this iteration of Chicago, you could probably argue, is ahead of schedule because they're playing enough young guys to say that. But what about the teams that have a different kind of ticking clock? What does it mean for them if they underachieve? So that to me is going to be pretty fascinating, especially because I think Detroit is capable. I do think Detroit is capable of beating the Knicks. I don't think whoever 7 is going to test Boston at all. I don't think whoever 8 is going to test Cleveland at all. But I think Detroit is capable, and I think Indy Milwaukee is a figurative coin flip. So that to me is something that makes the Eastern Conference interesting when you get past the Cavs and the Celtics, who to me have separated themselves from everybody else.
Chris, I talked about these teams needing to lock in for the playoffs. I am locked in to all of these games. I cannot wait to see who comes out of each conference or who comes out of each series. All of these things. It's going to be an exciting time for everything. But I do want to ask you a simple, yet not so simple question. Chris, do you think that Donovan Mitchell is happy with his decision not to go to New York and to come to Cleveland?
Yes, very much so. I don't think there's any part of Donovan Mitchell that is wondering what life would be like, what his career would look like if he went to New York instead of Cleveland. There's a reason why he ran around a Miami Beach golf course and celebrated going to the Cavs, despite the fact that a majority of people around the NBA, including Donovan, thought that he was New York bound. If he was at all upset about that, then he wouldn't have had that kind of reaction. So no, I don't think, he stays up late at night wondering what it would look like or where his career would go. I think he understands that even though it wasn't at the time his preferred destination, his number one preferred destination, and even though it wasn't what a lot of people around the NBA thought that he wanted out of his career, it's probably what he needed. This sense of stability, this sense of community, this sense of family, all of the things that make the Cavs and this group of Cavs so special, it just fits with Donovan. Like, it was his time to come to a situation and show Darius Garland the way, or help show Darius Garland the way. It was his time to go to a situation and empower Evan Mobley the way that Joe Ingles and Mike Conley empowered Donovan early in his career. So I just think Donovan understands the opportunity that he has here in Cleveland, and he is not taking it for granted. And if he had any doubts about the future of the organization, the viability of this team to compete for championships, then he wouldn't have signed the extension this past offseason. He wouldn't have made his mind up about the extension last January, February, that it was going to happen. It was just a matter of what the details of that extension were going to be. And I think for Donovan, he has always been primarily, look, everybody has different things that they want out of their career. Everybody has different things that appeal to them. And is an opportunity to play in New York and MSG be your home arena, is that appealing to somebody who grew up and was a New York native? Of course. There's no doubt about it. But that was never going to be the driving force of what made Donovan happy and how he defined success in his own career. And for him, primarily, it's been about winning and what gives him the best chance to compete for championships. And I think as we have seen this unfold over the last couple of years, maybe the first year it didn't look great, especially when the Cavs got punked out of the playoffs by that team. But I think we have seen the natural progression of this organization, and nobody would sit here and say that the New York Knicks are better positioned to win a championship this year or next year or the year after or the year after. And obviously the landscape of the NBA can change and rosters can change and situations can change. But this situation in Cleveland, this is a championship level team. This is a legitimate championship contender this year. And you can't sit here and just forecast that it's going to happen next year, the year after that. But it feels like this is a sustainable thing. It feels like the start of the Warriors dynasty. And it doesn't have that same feeling with the Knicks. And I think Donovan certainly recognizes that.
Chris, man, you love taking the words right out of my mouth, man. I said dynasty a little bit earlier and people looked at me crazy. And now you said Warriors dynasty, and I know people are going to be like, yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, that looks about right.
That's what it feels like.
Man, because these pieces, right? It's the overall roster. It's not just Donovan. It's not just Darius. It's not just the core four. DeAndre Hunter, Ty Jerome, Dean Wade. Like, the pieces just fit together. And obviously, there could be changes this offseason, and we're not going to get ahead of ourselves. But the fact of the matter is the core pieces, the known pieces, maybe if you want to say it, the top 8 players that will get the most minutes in the playoffs, those guys, that contingency feels like a big help and a big push to what could be the future of the Cleveland Cavaliers. And if you add pieces and players around them, it doesn't really matter how good those guys are if you can consistently rely on the top 8 guys, even though Kenny Atkinson likes to play 10, right? And I think, again, Donovan Mitchell having that first conversation, and I remember seeing on X, formerly Twitter, people were looking at the face that Donovan was making, having a conversation with Kenny for the very first time. I don't know about y'all, but when I meet somebody for the first time, I'm very standoffish. Okay, hold on, I'm going to listen to you, but they had lunch or dinner afterwards. They got into the nitty-gritty of the conversation, got into the roster, all those things. That's when Donovan, Kenny got on the same page and were able to understand that Kenny was the right guy. That's why he got the approval. Kenny Atkinson got the approval of Donovan Mitchell from the top down to go ahead and continue with that process, right?
You know, the top 8 that you mentioned, with the exception of Ty Jerome, they're all under contract. So it's not a situation where the Cavs are in salary cap hell, where they have the albatross of Bradley Beal's contract like Phoenix does. You know, what's Phoenix's pathway out? It's probably going to be, do they have to trade Kevin Durant and Devin Booker and start all over again? That might be their only exit strategy. You know, if the Knicks underachieve and they fire Tom Thibodeau, like, do they have to make changes with their roster too? because of all of the big money players that were part of that underachieving. You know what I mean? So when it comes to the Cavs, at the very least, I think it's fair to say that we don't know for sure that the core four together can win a championship. But we do know that the core four together can become the top team in the Eastern Conference and a legitimate title contender. We're there. The Cavs are a legitimate title contender. And a big part of that is because of the core four. So the pieces fit well enough to get to that point, right? The next point that is still up for evaluation, but they haven't had the opportunity in this system with this coach, with this supporting cast, with this rotation, with these lineups in combination, and all those different things that play into it. So to have all those guys locked up together and on the same timeline for contention, with the exception of Ty Jerome, that's a really, really good place to be. And it feels like a group that is set up for sustainable success, especially because, look, everybody has an ego. This is the NBA. These are big money players. There are a lot of things that come into play. But the ego, the disease of me, it doesn't feel like is going to get in the way, right? To borrow a Pat Riley
That is
term,
a bar. Disease
right?
of me?
Yes. Like, it doesn't feel like that is going to infect this locker room. It doesn't feel like that's going to change who Evan Mobley is. It doesn't feel like that's going to change who Darius Garland is. And I think as long as those things are the case, then I think there's no reason to believe that the Cavs will be anything but a contender for the next 3 to 4 years, at least, for as long as this group remains together, or the main pieces of this group remain together.
Man, that's a bar, Chris. That's a bar. I think we got to end there. You got to see who got the biggest cojones. I don't know if I can say that on here. I might have to take that out. But see who got the biggest.
You can say cojones. It's fine. I've said cojones so many times on podcasts and on the radio when referencing Kyrie Irving. It's fine because he was Mr. Cojones.
Man.
Every moment in a late game situation, like, he showed how big his cojones were. So it's fine. We can say it. I think I just said it 4 times in the span of 30 seconds. We're good.
So we'll see who has the biggest cojones coming out of the Eastern Conference and figure out which team the Cavs might have to face in the first round, then the second round. Then obviously we are predicting that the Cavs face the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals, and what that looks like and how beaten, bruised, whatever each team is based on their route to the Eastern Conference Finals. But we'll have to wait and see how all of those things pan out. I'm just excited to be a part of it. I know you guys cannot wait for the playoffs, and I can't wait for the playoffs. Obviously, the Indiana Pacers game on Sunday.
Please not Atlanta in round 1. Please not Atlanta in round 1.
I got to go back so I can get another one of them cups, Chris. I got to get one of them cups to freeze my drinks instantly. Woo! I'll be able to stay with my family down there. We'll be good. If cleveland.com sends me, we'll figure that out.
Like, 3 of the 4 would make me so excited. And if it's the one that wouldn't, I mean, that's kind of the payback for what was a perfect setup last year, honestly. But please, no, I don't know. No, I was talking.
You would rather Chicago than Atlanta?
Yes.
Man.
Oh my God, Chicago in the spring is glorious. Jeez, absolutely. I don't want to turn this into a Chicago versus Atlanta conversation, but the food is better. The atmosphere is better. The things that you can do around the city, better. Wrigley is better than whatever they call the park.
Truist Park. Hold on. I covered the Braves. Come on, Chris. Don't do this to me.
Don't try and compare Truist Park to Wrigley. It's no.
I'm not comparing the parks. The parks, it's out of this world. Wrigley Field is 100 times better. We understand this, but the teams. Well, Atlanta's bad this year. So anyway, being that it is 1:15 in the morning. I think it would be best for us to get out of here before we get into another rant. Save it for another day where we figure out who who the Cavs play in the first round. Maybe that will be our first podcast, maybe on the 19th before we figure out who those guys play. But with all
Come on,
that,
Atlanta, you can do it. You can do it. Get to 7. Get to 7. Come on, you can do it. Karis LeVert, George Niang, let's go.
With all that being said, for today's podcast, that'll wrap up the episode for the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs Insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. This is where you can send in whoever you think is the best team in the Eastern Conference when it comes to facing the Cleveland Cavaliers. You can say whether or not you think that Chicago is better than Atlanta. All these conversations can be had on Subtext so that we can get right back to you. I love having conversations with our subtexters to make them feel included as a community, and our phones are connected to your phones. We can get into conversations and debates. It's a lot of fun. But to do this, sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.